Let me welcome everybody to another edition of our Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series in honor of our centennial anniversary. Loyola Law School celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. We started on September 8th, 1920. This is certainly a reimagined iteration, but it's going to be really valuable. And what we'd like to do in this is bring together some key alumni and highlight their accomplishments, what they've done over the course of their career, and offer insights to current students. Today, we're focused on 3 alumni who have had a really rich background and set of experiences in diverse businesses. One of the conversations that we currently have a lot at Loyola is the role of lawyers serving in business, even not necessarily as practicing lawyers. So I'm so grateful to our guests today, and I think we're going to have a really terrific conversation. Let me briefly introduce them. First, we have Lloyd Greif. Lloyd is the president and CEO of Greif Company, which he founded in 1992. He did that following a decade-long investment banking career as vice chairman of Sutro and Incorporated. Lloyd is an alum of our evening program, which he is passionately committed to. Lloyd has come to my law and leadership course several times, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing from him today. Next, we have Walter Ulloa. Walter is the chairman and CEO of Entravision. Walter has over 40 years of Spanish language broadcast experience in the United States. He established Entravision in 1996. So we're grateful for him today. And finally, we have Reon Roski. Reon is the managing director and a board member of Majestic Realty Company. She started there in 2007 as senior counsel, and she's been a member of the board of directors since 1997. So again, this is only the briefest of introductions. We want to hear about their careers from them, but let's get going. And I'll throw this first question out to the group. Anyone can answer, although I will solicit an answer from each of you. What was the most memorable part, and this can either be positive or negative, of your experience at Loyola Law School?
Ladies first, Reon.
I think that there was like a certain day of the week, I was just trying to think of it, that was like bar night or everybody would go out to have, I forget, it was in the middle of the week, and we'd all
Thursday
go out.
night probably.
Night?
Thursday night of the week, right?
Yeah. And we'd all go out and have a drink, and it was really fun, and it was really, because it, normally it's so competitive nature, and it was just a nice, relaxing time to get together with everybody, and it was like at different bars, and everybody would meet up. And I was married in law school, and pregnant part of the time, so I guess I wasn't drinking part of the time, but it was always fun to go there and see people outside of classes. So that's one of my favorite moments.
Thank you for sharing that. Turf Club still happens. And then they also have bar review after that.
That was it, bar review.
It's interesting, Reon. I mean, one of the challenges we're facing right now, obviously in an environment where campus is not open, is that longing for community and how to create that community with our students in new and virtual ways. And I'd say we're learning a lot, but it's been really inspiring to watch the resilience of our students and our student affairs team to create those connections, even though we can't physically be together. Who else?
What was memorable for me was I met my wife in law school.
I knew you were going to go there.
Where else would I go? What could be more memorable than that, right? That's we've been married for what now? 34 years. That sounds right. No, 36 years. 34 years, 1986. But we've known each other for 39. Been boyfriend and girlfriend for 39. So that goes back to law school. And if it wasn't for a professor, and he wasn't my favorite professor, by the way, but he's going to have a special place in my heart because of this, Jerry Rosen, who was a first-year contracts professor, handed out a seating chart. And we filled it out on the first day of class, and Renee happened to be seated on my left. And then when we turned it in, he said, okay, remember where you're seated, because that's where you'll be seated for the rest of the semester. Now, this is law school. So you tell me, for all of us who've got one or more college degrees, when did you ever have a seating chart in a collegiate environment. But that was the only way Jerry could remember names. And obviously, there's a Socratic method. You're going to call on people. So I sat next to Renee that entire semester, and the rest is history. We became study buddies and went from there. The other thing, when you talk about Loyola, what I'll always remember is the quality of the professors, and specifically two that are near and dear to the heart. One, Chris May, my government professor, and one, Bill Crossgren, my real estate law professor. Those were really top-notch professors. They made it interesting, they made it entertaining, and they were damn good, and they were damn tough.
Thank you for that, Lloyd. As Lloyd knows, Chris I was lucky enough to be on the faculty at the same time as Chris at the early part of my career, and just an amazing faculty member. And the analogies that I've heard is that when he was teaching, it was like watching a conductor in the front of the room, and he was just in his element and a master of it. We all miss Bill Crossgren. He was just such a wonderful faculty member. I actually, as a new dean, had the honor of speaking at his funeral. And my dad, who is an alum of Loyola Law School and also a graduate of the evening program, Bill was his favorite professor also. So truly a special guy. So thank you for sharing that. Walter?
I remember Chris. I remember Chris roasted me. One of the early lessons you learn in law school, right, which is you don't show up to class unless you're prepared. And that the first couple of years, so evenings, 4 years at night. And I remember being a management consultant at the beginning with what is now Deloitte, and I was out of town. And you couldn't do this today, by the way, but then I remember arranging so my flight got me back to LAX in time that I could hustle from like landing at 5 o'clock to getting to Loyola Law School downtown by 6. And I walk into class a few minutes late, and this is government class. And sure enough, Chris calls on me immediately. Was I prepared? I was not prepared. Yeah, he roasted and flambéed me. I thought I was doing a good job just busting my butt to get there, working full-time, going to school full-time, which is what our evening students do. But no, you got to be prepared. So from that point on, I was always prepared, to the point where I'd raise my hand and he'd say, that's a rhetorical question, Mr. Greif. And then he'd move on, of course. So yeah, he was a great professor.
When he roasted you, did he make you stand up?
I don't think he made me stand up. I don't recall that part, but that didn't make it any easier.
Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
You got it.
Walter, how about you?
Michael, the most memorable memories for me were memories from my time at Loyola Law School. Certainly was the excellent legal training that I received while I was there. It was terrific, and the support that the school provided for first-year students certainly was critical for me getting through the law school. But I, like Lloyd, I think about the professors that I had when I was there, and the names that come to mind are Fred Lauer, who taught. I took a torts class from, and Fred was great. Professor Ogren, I don't remember his first name, he taught con law, and Professor Smith, who was a woman. I think she was one of the first women professors one of the early women professors at the law school. And then Father Vachon, who taught criminal law, and I think he may have been the last Catholic priest that taught at the law school. I'm not sure, but certainly was the only one at that time. But overall, I thought I think back, and I have really good memories of the professors at the school and how good they were and how professional.
Thank you for that. And thank you for acknowledging Fred. He is just a wonderful human being. I always joke, Fred is the reason that my dad was there when I was born. And I can briefly talk you through this. So my dad was an evening student at the time that Fred was the dean. And my dad was one of the first people to take what was then a Lamaze class and then learn to be in the room with the mom when the baby was being born. My birthday is July 22nd. It was during summer session. And my dad had to go to Dean Lauer quite nervously and say, I'm doing this thing where I'd like to be in the room. Can I get an exam rescheduled? And, to hear my dad and Fred tell it, my dad looked super nervous, and Fred said, oh, that's interesting. Sure, I'm sure we can make that happen. So Fred is quite literally the reason that my dad was there when I was born. So I'm grateful for that. So, and I want to encourage this to be a dialogue amongst the three of us. The format for this, or four of us, this is really, if we were sitting around, a couch or a fireside chat somewhere, is with the vibe that we're going for. Let me ask, Walter, maybe I'll start with you since you were last on the last one. Can you walk us through your path from having graduated Loyola Law School to where you are now?
Okay, I don't want to bore you with too long of a story, but I grew up in a rural community, Brawley, California, which is about 200 miles southeast of Los Angeles. It's a town right near the border, the Mexican border. The nearest Mexican town is Mexicali. And so while I was growing up there, there was very little media that we had access to due to the location of the town that I grew up in. And there were very little, or not any rock stations in the area. So my brother and I became interested in media, and we wanted to program this radio station there in Brawley. It was a country music station, and most of the region there was all agriculture. And so we went to the general manager and asked him if we could perhaps program the late or the night shift, particularly the weekends. And so that was how I started out in media. My brother was a DJ, I was the producer, and we would run rock for like 4 or 5 hours, mostly on the weekends. And so then when I left Brawley in '66, I went to SC. My brother also went to law school later, went to SC and then to law school. And then and then after SC, I graduated and enrolled at Loyola. And while I was at Loyola, my brother and I were actually producing some concerts at the time. So he had a radio. He was a disc jockey on the USC radio station, and so we stayed kind of involved with media during that time that we were in law school. And then after law school, I worked for a short period of time for some lawyers and doing legal work. And then there was an opportunity for me to work at KMEX in Los Angeles, which is, you may or may not know, is the it's the most important station for the Univision network, being in Los Angeles, right, the largest Latino market in the country. But when I joined it in '76, it was pretty. Nobody knew really about KMEX except the people that watched it, and UHF was really at that time was a very new technology, and so I started working there, writing editorials, and I became more passionate about the business as time went on, and I just kind of at that point I just left the idea of pursuing a law career and dived into media. At the time, Spanish language media, which is most of what I do today. And I was at KMEX from 1976 to 1988, had a series of positions there. I was a news director, I was a sales manager, I really learned the business while I was there. And then in '88, I left to start building what eventually became Entravision. And that was a struggle, but certainly, it was great to get where we are today. But I left in '88. In 1995, we launched Entravision, actually '96. And then we took it public in 2000, and of course, here we are today. So that's my brief story.
Reon?
So I went to USC, graduated USC, and I had 3 majors: political science, East Asian studies, and Chinese language. And then I lived in China and worked for the Chinese government for a few years. Came back to the United States, always wanted to become a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. I thought lawyers were smart, and so I should be a lawyer. And there's a lot of thought put into that. And so I came back to the United States, got married, went to law school, and thought about doing business with China. And this is, 90s, early 90s. And I lived in China in the 80s. And so there really wasn't law in China back then. I mean, I translated the Chinese securities law from Chinese to English, and I think it was this big. I think it was 70 pages or 60, whatever. It was so there wasn't really a practice of law. And then being married, I and I clerked for a Judge Trevisan, Federal District Court, Ninth Circuit. And he's like, I think you should go into real estate law because you're a great negotiator. And meanwhile, I was pregnant with triplets. So I think the China kind of put on hold. And I went and worked at Allen Matkins for a few years. I had amazing training with real estate law. And then I went to Christensen Glazer, or Chris, I think it was then Christensen Miller, which is now Glazer Weil, and worked there for, I think, 15 years, for a long time. And with a great group of attorneys. And meanwhile, I was on the board of my family company, which is Majestic Realty. And during those years, I loved being a lawyer, and I loved working in the law firm, and I loved all my friends. And I loved the social atmosphere of a law firm, which is very different than in a corporation. And it was, I think, a great choice for me being a mom. And then I had 4 kids. So I had 4 kids in 2 years. And it allowed, being a transactional attorney, especially real estate transactional attorney, allowed me to juggle being a mom and being a full-time attorney in a great big law firm. You know, there were times I wanted to go to the kids' basketball games or baseball games, and I was able to get an hour or 2 hours off and go do that and just get the work done sometime that night. You know, just had to be done that day, which it worked great for me. And the law firms were great for me. So then fast forward, my family business, they needed, my father needed me to come in, and it was pretty sudden. So then, but he was very smart about it because he knew I was hesitant in coming into the family company. And he said, well, just come for 1 day a week and then come 2 days a week. And the law firm was very nice about it. And so it'd be 1 day or 2 days. Well, can you make that 3 days? And then I think within a year or two, it was 5 days a week. And my law firm was so gracious. I think they kept my office for 5 years. And I hadn't been back probably 2 or 3 years. And they still kept it, waiting for me to come back because I kept expecting to come back to the law firm. And of course, my dad, I never came back to the law firm. And
Reon, it wasn't that your law firm was so gracious. It was because you were so good. They kept praying that you'd come back.
That was sweet. Thank you.
That's nice.
But anyway, I loved it. Thank you very much. And so but I love working with my dad. And so I think I've been here now 15 years or something. It's been give or take a year. And it's been wonderful to work with my father and learn. It's a whole different mentality. Being a lawyer, you're very risk averse. And I read documents and I see things. I'm like, oh, you can't do that. You can't, this could happen and or in a deal, this can happen. But I've learned over these last 15 years to wear more of my business hat and say, well, you know what, that stuff is not important because really in the end, no one's going to open up the agreement. You know, it's 1 out of every 50 or 100 agreements somebody actually opens up and litigates. And, you know, you just do the best you can do and it's got to be a win-win situation. Well, when you're a lawyer, it can't be a win-win situation. You got to go for the blood. But it's been wonderful, and it's been wonderful the process of being with my dad and him slowly, you know, giving me the control and the reins of a family company that's been around for 75 years. It was started by my grandfather, and I've just enjoyed the whole journey. And now my kids, so my triplet boys are now 25, and my daughter is 23, and they are now coming into the company. Although I tell them they can't come into the company, they got to work somewhere else for 10 years. But they keep trying to inch their way back in. Like, because of the COVID situation, jobs are hard right now. I'm like, well, Mom, I don't have a job somewhere else, so can't I come in? You know, so we're negotiating. But it's
Don't come in 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, then 3 days a week.
Yeah, pattern there,
Thank
right?
you. Thank you for that, Reon. Lloyd?
So we'll just add in to Reon's, I know her father well, and Ed Roski's a great guy. So
thank you.
let's leave it at that. So the law was, so my path was short because when I was at law school, I was already, when I started, I was a management consultant. And when I finished law school, I was already an investment banker. But how I got to law school was kind of happenstance. When I was editor of the school newspaper in Santa Monica High School, Samo High, I was battling censorship. So I came this close to bringing a lawsuit against the school district. And that piqued my interest in the law because I had done a lot of studying on my own about constitutional law and censorship and the press, you know. So I went to UCLA undergrad initially as a poli-sci student, but poli-sci, which is basically pre-law, right? But poli-sci turned me off. And so I ended up being an econ graduate, and I went from economics to an MBA at USC. So how did I end up at Loyola? Loyola was, it's a long story, so I'm not going to go into it, but I did decide to come back to my interest in the law. And even though I was already in business at that point, I figured I could balance the two by going at night. And that's a great thing about the evening program is that you can have a career and get an education in the law. So I started off law school as a management consultant, and I wrapped up law school. I was already an investment banker. I'd been recruited into Sutro and Company, which, as you said, Michael, you know, they were the oldest investment bank in the West, founded in 1858 during the California gold rush in San Francisco. I rose from being associate in investment banking to vice chairman in investment banking. I will credit some of that to my legal education because I think it's, you know, the training in, I took securities law, tax law, contracts law, secured transactions, you know, corporate finance in law school. And that certainly gave me knowledge to facilitate my deal making. And so I rose rapidly up the ladder at Sutro. But during that period of time, while I was rising from associate to vice chairman, you know, Sutro was going through its own metamorphosis. It had been independently owned by the employees, and we sold it. You know, I joined them in November of '81. We sold it in May of 1986 to John Hancock Mutual Life Insurance, and slowly but surely became more bureaucratic and less entrepreneurial. I agreed to be vice chairman in '89 with the understanding that the administrative aspect of running the investment banking division and co-running the firm with 4 of the people on the management committee would be 10 to 20% of my time, and I'd still have 80 to 90% to do deals, which is my first and only love, really, other than Renee, of course. That 10 to 20 became 30 to 40%, and so after doing that for 3 years, I decided that I was not enjoying what I was doing. I resigned from Sutro, took several executives with me, and launched Greif Co. So that was in March of '92. And that was a little bit of a contrarian thing to do. That was a recession. It was a tail end of a recession back then. At the time, the worst recession to hit California since the Great Depression. And to hang your own shingle out, you know, was a little gutsy. But it was also, I'd already built my network, I'd built my reputation, and I'd built my skill set at Sutro. So it was basically a 10-year apprenticeship, so I was ready. And we hit the ground running. And so we're now in our 29th year. But I can tell you that the Loyola pedigree, I use that as much as I use the MBA training at USC. It's been a hand in glove fit.
Thank you. And I can't resist. Tell us about the owl.
So the owl. So when I was at Sutro, if I handed you my business card as vice chairman, you'd see scales on it. And you might think, scales, what is that, scales of justice, am I a lawyer? No, it went back to what I said was the history of Sutro, the gold dust trading scales. That's what it, you know, that's the company's formation during the California gold rush. So when I launched Greif & Company, I wanted to have a symbol that when people would see it, they would think of Greif & Company. And Merrill Lynch had the bull, so I couldn't take that. T. Rowe Price had a ram. That wasn't interesting. Prudential Securities had the Rock of Gibraltar, but everybody else had nothing. If you look at Goldman Sachs, you look at Morgan Stanley, it's just fancy type, right? There's no logo. And I wanted a symbol. And I remember having breakfast at the Regency Club in Westwood, doesn't exist anymore, with the attorney who incorporated us, a guy by the name of Michael Silver. And he said, well, what about an eagle? We were brainstorming about a logo, and he said, what about an eagle? And I said, nah, that's overused, and that's America, right? But that made me start thinking. I'm a hunter, so, you know, it made me start thinking about birds of prey. I thought eagle, hawk, falcon, owl. And when I thought owl, it just hit me in my tracks, and I thought, well, wait a minute. So an owl's goes back to the Greek goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom and integrity. I've always, you know, put my client first in everything I've done. And yet, it's the great horned owl is nature's most efficient hunter. It can kill an animal 4 times its weight and size. So wisdom, integrity, strength, and aggressiveness. I mean, what's not to like about that logo? So we had it designed. Actually, it was designed by a logo designer who did the design for Mrs. Gooch's Natural Food Markets, which was a deal we were working on at the time. And I liked their logo. It's kind of like a Mother Goose logo, a wholesome, good food kind of a logo. So he executed, the guy's name was Doug Stone. He executed the owl for us. And then I said, I want something that ties it into investment banking. So if you look at the type on Greif Company, that's the same type style that you'll see on U.S. Dollar bills. So it's got the securities written into the logo as well. And then underneath it says the Entrepreneur's Investment Bank, and we totally focus on representing entrepreneurs. So that's the story of the owl. It has fit us like a hand in glove, and thank you for asking.
Thank you. So now let me kind of turn to something that all of you raised in your answer, but I want to go a little deeper on it. In what ways did your legal training at Loyola prepare you to navigate a business environment? And I can throw that out to anybody, and feel free to comment on each other's answers.
Well, I want to jump in on that one because I think the training was excellent to do what I do. So as a lawyer, and particularly at a school like Loyola that produces some of the best litigators in the country, and certainly the state of California, you have to be able to argue either side of a case, right? You need to either argue the defense, or you got to argue the prosecution, or the plaintiff, the defendant, whatever the case may be. So you need to look at the same set of facts and build a framework and an argument, and then you need to look at precedents and all this, and you need to fit it all together. It's a very analytical and logical way of thinking that you get trained to do as a lawyer. Well, I got to tell you, I'm framing arguments all the time when I'm trying to negotiate a deal. I'm trying to point out, the strengths of my client and downplay the weaknesses. And if a weakness gets brought up, I need to differentiate that, or whatever the case may be. So I can tell you the training, just the way you think, the way your brain works as a lawyer, is perfect for an investment banker. And I do mergers and acquisitions and corporate financings of equity and debt securities. So I'm always across the table from somebody else, and I need to convince them of my client's position or my client's value or the attractiveness of the business, whatever the case may be. So it's another form of selling, but it's in law we call it winning the case. In investment banking we call it closing the deal, but they're synonymous. I mean, it's really variations on the same theme. The other thing is securities law, tax law, contracts law, secure transactions law. I mean, all of these things factor into putting deals together, and I'm able to keep attorneys honest. And what I mean, and so I don't do the legal work on any of the transactions I do, but if I'm negotiating a deal, I want to make sure the deal I negotiated that they then hand off to the attorney to document, that's the deal that closes. And so I'm reviewing those contracts side by side with the attorney to make sure that the deal I put together is the deal that's reflected in the documents that get signed and the money that goes into my client's pocket. So we're very hands-on throughout all processes of a deal, much unlike most attorneys. Much unlike most investment bankers, and that's because the letter of intent isn't a deal that closes. The definitive agreement is a deal that closes. I want to make sure nothing gets lost between the two. Most investment bankers, once the letter of intent's executed, they go off and focus on the next deal. We never take our eyes off the ball until that deal is closed, and it's the deal we struck.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Others? I was just going to comment on Lloyd. I remember getting his letters in some of the different USC business. I mean, you write the most amazing letters. I mean, everything is to a detail. And of course, you've had that legal training because you focus on what is important. And I think you IRAC in your letters. I mean, you state the issue, you go through the analysis, and you come up with your conclusion, but they are works of art. They are by far.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Walter?
Thank you. Just to add to the comments that have been made so far, I think for me, again, the analytical and skills and training that I received at Loyola have been very important for my business career. The training in contracts law, torts, we're constantly dealing with contracts and or acquisitions that we're looking at or not doing, one of the two. But contract law is so important to all of our businesses. Tort law, certainly having training in tort law is really important, I think, to an entrepreneur or someone that runs or owns a business. Constitutional law I found very, very, very important as well. Property law, of course, corporations. All those classes were very helpful to me have been very helpful to me in my business career. And again, all the other classes that I was able to take while I was at Loyola have been very helpful. So
thank you for that.
That's it.
Thank you, Walter.
Sure.
So let me follow up. You're all now in a position where you're hiring lawyers for lots of different things, probably on the litigation side, on the transactional side. What do you find you are looking for in an attorney? What are things that work for you? What are challenges that you see or things that you would counsel lawyers not to do?
For me, I want to be heard, and I want it to the document to turn out in the way, that I've stated. And sometimes I get very frustrated with lawyers in the law firms because I might say that this document needs to be changed this way, and it doesn't get there. And maybe because of being a lawyer for so long, it really frustrates me. And sometimes I just end up just marking up the document myself, which is not really time efficient for me. And I'm learning not to do that. And, but that it is frustrating. Or if somebody just throws a document together and doesn't really read it. I mean, they got to read it, and it's like one big mathematical formula, and they got to make sure it all flows and it syncs. And I think so many attorneys, not so many, but there are some attorneys, so I'm just going through the negative, I guess, that are, because I just had this situation yesterday, that they just hit the certain paragraphs and they don't realize how it all works together and how it's one big thing, and it's not something that you can just throw together.
So my take on that question would be, I want a problem-solving attorney, not a problem-creating attorney or causing attorney. And I've seen both, and so I stay away from the latter and I seek out the former. So there's plenty of obstacles in getting a deal done, and I don't need a lawyer to create any that don't need to be there. There's an issue, yeah, it is a legitimate issue, by all means, bring it up. But if you're creating a problem such that you can then, creating a problem that didn't exist such that you can then solve it and bill more hours, not working for me. I prefer a lawyer who gets the business aspect of the deal. So if they've got some business background or some business training, including an undergraduate degree in business, that's a positive. So they can understand a balance sheet, they can understand a P&L, they kind of get it. And because there's a lot of things that you'll have in there, like working capital, true ups and what have you on deals, on M&A deals in particular, or earnouts or whatever the case may be, and making sure that's properly translated into a legal document that could be that you might need to enforce at some point in the future down the road after, the dust has settled on the deal and it's long closed. Yeah, I want an attorney who can walk the walk and talk the talk. So having one that's experienced is key, but has got a track record of doing deals that they get done efficiently, get done correctly, with the least amount of fuss and muss. There's plenty of opportunities for deals to blow, and it's my job to make sure they don't blow unless they should blow. And let's be clear, if somebody's reneging on the deal in some way, manner, or form, or trying to retrade the price, then by all means throw the bum out. But I don't need to have my attorney, who's supposed to be my partner on the deal, creating problems that never existed to begin with.
Walter?
Here at our corporate offices, we have 3 lawyers, and I communicate mostly with the general counsel. And I want him and of course the team to help me make better decisions. And by that, I mean, I want them to be able to simplify the issue or the fact pattern, and then give me their advice as to what they think we should do. And then, of course, once I have all the facts, I may ask certain questions and try to get to the best answer. And as far as documentation is concerned, we used outside counsel for most transactions that we're involved with. But I like documents to be simple to understand. I don't like documents that have a lot of ambiguity in them. And I want lawyers, certainly the ones here in the office, when they come to me with an issue, to be able to summarize the issue for me, or issues, and then again help me make the right decision.
Thank you.
Sure.
So now let me switch gears a bit. The great legal philosopher Yogi Berra said that it's hard to predict the future because it hasn't happened yet. But I would ask each of you, what challenges do you see confronting both your business, but also kind of business and industry generally, here in California, but also nationally, over the next few years? And obviously the elephant in the room is how has any of that changed in light of the fact that we find ourselves in the midst of what has been declared a global pandemic? So it's a big question. I'm happy to.
Yeah, there's actually two elephants in the room, right? So one is the pandemic, COVID-19. The other is all of the protests, the civil unrest that has occurred over the last few weeks, that I think portends all kinds of changes in the way things have gone down. And I'm not just talking about changes in terms of law enforcement. I'm talking about class disparity, right? So you have COVID-19 has accentuated the polarization and the inequalities, because it's been it hasn't been an equal opportunity job killer. So it kills certain jobs and not other jobs, right? So I'm an investment banker, so I can easily do what I do. There's some complications, but I can still get deals done operating on a remote basis. But people that are in service professions or unskilled labor or what have you, they're getting there's a ton of pain and suffering that's going on there, and it's accelerated the digital transformation. There are going to be winners or losers that come out of the pandemic, and I think it has. So I think some of the protesting that we've seen gone on has been certainly related to what happened to Mr. Floyd, and how that's representative of what happens in cities across the country more often than it should. For no question, shouldn't happen at all. But I also think it's a reflection of some pent-up frustration associated with the shelter-in-place that's been now, in its third month. What does this mean for us from a business perspective? You look at here in California. California is already the highest tax state in the union, and now it's got that's that rainy day fund that Governor Brown put aside. Now you see it, now you don't. So we've got we're going to have a deficit that's going to have to be addressed some way, manner, or form. Usually the way politicians address it is with a three-letter word called tax. So we've already got a heavy tax burden on businesses, and there's already a heavy regulatory burden on businesses. Unless Sacramento gets its act together, you could see increased flight from this state of entrepreneurs and businesses to friendlier domiciles, and that's already been going on ever since the tax rate went up to begin with, and it was further exacerbated by the fact that the Tax Act that came out of Washington, D.C. eliminated state deductibility for federal taxes. So I think the impact on the economy from the pandemic and the impact on the economy from the rioting and the looting that occurred and just the fact you had to have the National Guard and heavy police presence, that costs money. And it's further disrupted businesses, particularly retail establishments, just as they were beginning to reopen. It's for some of those establishments that maybe had a chance, they were hanging on by a thread, it just cut the thread. So I think it's not going to be pretty as a result of that. And it's going to, as I said, it's going to speed the digital transformation. So it's going to be interesting to hear what Reon says in terms of impact on real estate. I know I'm already hearing it's going to have an impact on offices, office buildings, and the value of office buildings in terms of people feeling that, hey, you know what, it worked pretty well to telecommute. Maybe I don't need to be in office as much, and maybe I don't need as much space in that office suite. So we could have an impact on that, and if it has an impact on this demand for office space, it'll certainly have an impact on the rental rates of office space. We all know what the impact is on retail in terms of bricks and mortar retail, and particularly malls. That's not a pretty sight. That's a war zone, to put it mildly. But I think the other issue that's a big issue that's out there, that's more in the spotlight today, is so societal good. The pressure on businesses to not just focus on creating shareholder value, but also focus on creating societal good. And it also magnifies the disparity between what executives receive and what the rank and file employees receive. So this whole inequality in compensation and focus on sustainability and societal benefit is going to change, I think, the way we do business in the years to come.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
So, we're in the business of distributing third-party content via television, radio, and digital. We produce news in most of our television programming, and we sell advertising to support the business, right? But as you can imagine, or maybe you've read, our ratings are pretty high, both television and radio during this pandemic. But advertising has pretty much disappeared in April, and May was better than April, and June will be better than May. But it's slow, and it'll remain slow. I think we're in for 3 tough years as a result of demand being shut off and trying to turn it back on. I think during this time, a number of companies have downsized and furloughed, a number of their people, maybe 20-30% of the staff. I don't think that's going to come back right away. I think companies are going to go forward and figure out how to operate the businesses that we're in efficiently and with less people. And that's going to have a chilling effect on the economy. Without more people to increase demand and consumption, then the economy will continue to struggle. So I don't see us getting back to pre-COVID levels of unemployment for a while, 3-4 years, maybe longer. So it's going to, but it's everything we're doing right now is changing. Digital has changed our lives so much. Look at what we're doing right now. We're having this conversation live, and we can see each other and respond to each other. That wasn't possible, a while ago. And yet, back to Lloyd's point, a lot of companies are going to reduce their travel. They're going to have more conferences with clients and advisors via Zoom and other platforms, and that's going to have an impact on travel, hospitality. So it's going to be interesting to see how our lives all change as a result of this pandemic. They were already changing as a result of the digital revolution, but I think what the digital revolution was going to do in 5 years, it did in 1, where we're now, we're using, communicating so much more via digital. Office space, as Lloyd pointed out, is something it's going to be, everyone's taking a different look at it and saying, well, maybe I don't need all that space. Maybe I could buy with half of it. And I think that's where it's going. So anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you.
What came to my mind is during this COVID process is that there's like a Senate bill out there called SB 939. And being a lawyer, you put a lot of credence into your contracts. So you sign a contract with a tenant, and a tenant, you've got certain obligations being a landlord, and the tenant has certain obligations as being a tenant, one of them paying rent. Well, there's a bill up there that is going to do away with the contract and say that, you know what, you signed this contract with the commercial entity to sophisticated businesses, but now we're going to give a tenant the right to terminate it. And you know what, landlord, if you don't want to agree to whatever terms tenant wants, and they can terminate it. And that's huge. And even if it, let's say that even changes, it doesn't, they change it, it's not as strong. There's different interpretation or different, suggestions and amendments of changing this to capping landlord can only get 6 months rent, but you're not going to get that rent for a year and a half or 2 years. And that's only if the tenant is still around. You can't evict them. You can't, the remedies that were normally given to us have been taken away. And it's changed the playing field. And how does that affect? I mean, to me, that's like, it doesn't just affect the landlords or landowners. I was told that we no longer supposed to say landlords. We're not supposed to say landowners. It's going to affect everybody because there's pension funds, there's teachers, there's firefighters. Their money is invested in real estate. There's, we're privately held. There's big REITs. I mean, it's a trickle down effect. Also, how does it affect property values? What lender is going to want to lend on a building when, normally you use the lease as a collateral if a tenant can cancel it and can later terminate or change the terms of the deal. I mean, I just think that they're using COVID as a reason, and it's going to have widespread changes, and it's going to affect lawyers. And because what's the use of us negotiating a contract if it can be changed? So that's what
the Senate bill you're talking about, Reon, is state Senate bill, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's different.
And that's a sign of California. I mean, California is way out there by itself, and that's not sustainable to continue to be so hostile to business. Right,
completely. And there's there's county and city moratoriums. And if you tie somebody's hands, because a landlord still has to maintain the building, still has to pay for all this stuff. There's stuff going on. And if they're not getting, there's some study that says it's like 8 cents on the dollar is what actually the landlord makes in a deal. The landlord can't be fronting all that expenses. And it doesn't work. But it's just an unbalance of the system, and it's law, and it's going to come down, and it's going to change, and it's going to change how we write contracts or the importance put onto them. So I think that's kind of huge.
The only other change I would add in when I was talking about the digital transformation, just so people understand, and we talked about CV19 being the great polarizer. If you think about CV19, it's among other things in terms of what we're doing right now is, as Walter was addressing or referencing, this Zoom conference call, this Zoom webinar. Frankly, you don't need these trade shows maybe as much as you thought you did, or these conferences or business travel. But you also have the situation, well, are you going to be more comfortable having a store attendant who's a robot or a waiter who's a robot? Because guess what? You're not going to get CV19 from the robot unless you touch them, and you got no reason to touch them. And so I think the service trades, manual labor, with the advancing technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, you name it, all that's going to do is further exacerbate this great divide between the haves and the have-nots and the people that. So I think education is has always been, for me, it's been the great equalizer. And I was born with a tin spoon in my mouth, not a silver spoon, let alone a platinum spoon. And I wouldn't be where I am today were it not for my education. And I think it's going to be an increasingly important differentiator. Folks that don't have a college education, let alone a legal education, are going to be hard pressed in the economy of the future.
So, Lloyd, let me pick up on that theme for my last question. What advice do you all have for a law student who's interested in pursuing a career in business?
So have a JD MBA, but I didn't do them simultaneously, right? Because I was working full time, so I couldn't possibly take myself out of the labor force because I had to pay my way through school. I think there's immense value associated with combining a law degree with a business degree, and it doesn't have to be an MBA. It can be an undergraduate business degree. It can be a one-year program. A lot of universities, I think Loyola does as well. I know USC does have one-year master's programs so that you can get the basics, so to speak, and accomplish it in 12 months instead of 24. I think that's important. I think to focus, if you don't have that background and you're a law student, you should still focus on corporate law in terms of a position initially, so that you can get that experience that way. And that means, you're not getting into the litigation side of the practice that you're joining. You're not getting into employment law. You're not getting into family law or any of that stuff. You're going to focus on corporate law, transactions law, tax law, securities law, M&A law. And I think that will get you indirectly a better understanding of how the world works in business. So that'll be easier for you to make that transition into business. Let's face it, most of our government leaders have what degree? They have law degrees. So why can't that apply as a business leader as well, that you have a law degree? I think legal education is extremely important. I know it's made a huge difference in my career trajectory and in my success. And I think so. I would recommend that they either backfill from a business education standpoint, or get into a legal job that's very much tied to business, so that they're getting good hands-on experience. And then maybe after they've done that for a few years, look to make a change.
Thanks, Lloyd. Reon, Walter?
So for me, I agree with Lloyd in everything he says. I think it's good to go to the corporate route, corporate transactional, and it's great experience to be in a law firm. I felt that I learned so much. You learn a lot in law school, but then you're really able to put it to practice and how the words all work together. I think transactional is the way to go. And then I think that then you segue to one of your customers, your clients, and go in-house and become a general counsel, and you move up that way. I think that's the perfect way. I've had a lot of girlfriends do that in entertainment. They worked at Latham, and then they went over to Disney, and then they became general counsel of Disney, and then they're set for life with their stock options and everything like that. And they retire and do their own personal projects. I think it's a wonderful, and because you get the training and the thought process of how you're able to be in the mix of all this stuff happening, and you can figure out what is important. That's really what you learn in law school is with all the mumble jumble, is how to zone in what is important, what matters, and then that's what you focus on. Because otherwise you get lost in all the other stuff that's going on. Where's the money? What's the important part of this deal? How am I going to move on to the next step? And I think there's no better training than law school, and then going into the law firms and going that route.
I think Reon makes a great point. So that ladder from the law firm to being general counsel of one of your clients at that law firm is a short ladder indeed. And then you can ladder from there. If you decide that you really don't want to continue to practice law, then keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities to move into another part of that same company, whether it's the finance side, the accounting side, sales side, marketing side, management side. But once you're there, and if you have the wherewithal to make that transition, general counsel doesn't have to be you don't have to go from assistant general counsel to general counsel. Rather, you can go from general counsel into another leadership role.
Thank you. Walter?
I believe strongly in education, and it is not only is it the great equalizer, to me it's the only equalizer between the haves and the have-nots. And I believe that underneath a lot of this unrest is this inequality that we have today between, the left side of the ledger where a few people, many people have a lot, and on the right side of the ledger, a lot of people have very little. And the only way we're going to fix that is through education. That's K through 12. That has to be. We've got a great university system, great law schools, but our K through 12 is a disaster. And until we can get the federal government and state governments focused on fixing our educational system across the country, we're going to be struggling as a nation. We're going to be, we're not going to be the nation that we think we are today. I'm not even sure we're the one we think we are today, for that matter. I think this has been a big awakening for all of us this last 3-4 months with the pandemic, with the unrest. Our health system is, I mean, if you really look at it carefully, it's a mess. There is no real U.S. health system. Every county, every city, every state has their own health system. It's just a hodgepodge of healthcare, and yet the healthcare we provide our citizens is so. When you compare it to other industrialized nations, we don't come in first. We come in, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th, 9th. I don't know what the number is, but we're not in the top 5. That's for sure. So we have big problems to fix, and the biggest issue for me is education. As far as and making it available for everyone, and certainly the people that are on the lower end of the economic ladder. And then as far as it goes to, or my comments on young law students who are entering law school or in law school and trying to figure out what they're going to do. I mean, I think certainly, taking the required courses that we all took in law school and choosing electives that we're interested in certainly is critical. That opens up, opportunities, I think, for everyone to see what they want to do eventually when they're out of law school. But I certainly would encourage young students to get as much out of law school as they can, to work as hard as they can, and to be open to how they might be able to use that law degree, that legal training in business. And I would encourage them to seek opportunities in business as well as law.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Well, no doubt we could go on for hours, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. This has been a terrific session, and I really appreciate all of you sharing your histories, your thoughts, your ideas. They're going to be of great use to our alumni community generally, and certainly to our current students. So thank you for making the time. I truly am appreciative. And we will continue seeing you as we celebrate our centennial anniversary. As you know, I have taken my unlimited powers as dean and declared that our centennial will extend into as much of 2021 as we need it to be able to do it justice and celebrate in person. So thank you all for your connection and support of our community. And I really appreciate you making the time for this really stimulating conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Reon. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
It was our pleasure. It was a pleasure being with the distinguished panelists, Reon and Walter. So thank you, Michael, for making this happen.
Thank you, guys. I realize how busy you are.
And giving us the opportunity to participate.
Great.
Thank you all so much. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great day.